Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry, who will always be known as Chandler from Friends, tells his life story and his confrontation with the big terrible thing, which is drug addiction. And that's a big theme of the book, and he talks about it from several different angles as he has led a life where he has had to, this has been a constant struggle for him. I got this book because of a YouTube debate that I saw between Matthew Perry and Peter Hitchens, who was strongly against drug decriminalization. They had a back and forth, Chandler arguing that addiction is a terrible disease and these people are victims, and Peter Hitchens arguing that they aren't victims, they're choosing to take drugs and it's their fault that they're in their situation. I thought it was an interesting discussion. I think it's an interesting topic because I think there are a lot of subtleties in it. So naturally, when Chandler came out with his book, I had to read it and see his side of the story. So when he was really young, his father left him and his mother, and ever since then he's had what he refers to as daddy issues of people abandoning him because he's not good enough. And that is the thing that haunts him, and he never feels like he is enough in all these situations that he's in throughout his life. It's the lingering thread. And going along with that, he had his first drink when he was 14, and he said it was the first time that he felt normal. He felt this inner happiness, and he thought, this is what other people must feel like all the time, and I'm just broken and off to the side. So that became a crutch that he lived with, and as the book goes on, you can see it just gets worse and worse and worse. He eventually goes to Hollywood, makes some friends, and he takes a little acting gigs on the side, but he wants to be famous more than anything. And he prays to God something to the effect of, do whatever you want to me, just make me famous. And a little while later, he got his big break as Chandler. The show was a huge success. He got movie offers. He basically got everything he could have wanted. He was dating Julia Roberts. She was wonderful, and yet nothing in all of that could do for him what alcohol was doing for him. The alcohol and the drugs, like he needed them to keep himself together, even though he was getting all of this success and all this other worldly praise. It just wasn't enough. He talks about how he keeps trying to go to a new place, but the problem is you go to a new place and you're still there. Like you still have to live with yourself, and the place doesn't really change the underlying problem that you're trying to avoid. So Matthew Perry's co-starred with River Phoenix and Chris Farley, who both died from drug overdoses. And so he knows this, and he still can't stop himself from being dependent on drugs. And that he talks about how that's his full-time job. Like, how can I find this many pills that will get me through this much time? And he's going through every avenue he can find. I read Chris Farley's book last year, and that's a similar kind of story. And his story has one of the most tragic endings that I can imagine. Apparently he was with a girl and he had a lot of drugs in his system, and his last words were, "Don't leave me." And she left, and then he died, and those were his last words, which I thought was so sad. And then in this book, there is a point where he is similarly loaded with drugs, and he tells the girl he's with, like, "Don't leave me." And I had this flashback to Chris Farley's book. I thought, no, gosh, what a horrible way to go. But in Matthew Perry's case, the girl didn't leave him. She stayed with him, and he ended up surviving, and it's a much happier ending, thank goodness. So then he hits bottom. He barely survives a whole bunch of ordeals that he's putting his body through. And that's about the time that he goes on the BBC show and debates Peter Hitchens. He actually talks about it in the book. He starts by berating Peter Hitchens, and then describes the interview where, according to him, he just trounced Peter Hitchens and his silly ideas. I thought the actual interview was a little more even-handed. But something that he said in the interview that I thought was striking is he says that it's not an issue of willpower. He said, once I have a drink, then it's all over. Then it's the allergy of the body that kicks in, and I don't have any agency, which I thought was a bit much. And actually in this book, he has a line that goes even further than that. He says, once I have decided that one drink won't hurt me, then I am no longer responsible for my actions. Which I think is crazy. Like, personal responsibility, personal choice is in there somewhere. You don't just lose it that quickly. But the book ends on a very positive note. He finally has concluded that after his whole lifetime of thinking he's not enough, he's not enough, he's not enough, he finally has this inner peace that he is enough, and he's going to spend the rest of his life trying to help other addicts cope with this terrible disease, which I think is impressive. So good for Chandler. I'm going to give this book 3.5 stars. If you have any recommendations, leave them in the comments below.